Iranians continue to control the straits throughout the ceasefire. Clearly, Trump blinked first. But, who blinks first and who actually comes out on top of a negotiation is not necessarily the same thing. I still think Trump is in a very dire situation, but he's really managed to get himself out of the worst situation, because as long as the US is no longer in an active state of war, the Iranians, even if they want more, they're not going to close the straits. They're going to keep it open. It's just that they're going to be charging fees of the ships, because that's how they make money. They don't make any money by closing it entirely. So oil prices will come down as long as he doesn't continue the blockade of the blockade. And he will, manage to get out of some of the worst of his situation. He will have criticisms, clearly, from folks saying that, you started a war and at the end of the war, Iran is controlling the straits, which it didn't do before that. But Trump's own base will just be very happy that oil prices are coming down, gas prices are coming down, food crisis, etc., is avoided, and there's not going to be an endless war. There was an exit out of this, and that's going to be more important to Trump than what people in the blob say about him and his conduct and his performance here.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Just a point. So Iran is not blockading the Strait of Hormuz. They're just charging a fee for ships that go through. The US is only blockading ships that go in and out of Iranian ports. So we talk about Iran's economy getting choked off by Trump, but Iran is making money anyway by charging a toll on the other ships. So doesn't that mean Iran is in a good position to be able to sustain this more than the global economy, because they're not being choked off to zero? They can still charge a fee, which is $100 billion a year if based on normal traffic.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be that much, but
unless the American blockade, I think, applies to ships that do pay the toll, I think.
Yes. And it's been unclear, because the CENTCOM has gone back and forth on that and said that they're only going after ships that are porting in Iran, which may not be all of the countries that are paying those tolls. But bottom line is, this was a kind of a silly step by the United States. Blockading a blockade does not fix the situation in any way, shape, or form. Iran has more than 100 million barrels of oil on the waters already, and they had already shipped out a lot before this, not just because of the sanctions, but before this war as well, because of a scenario like this. So they can sustain this longer than Trump can sustain oil prices being above $100, $120. So I don't think this was a winning card in any way, shape, or form. I think this is a negotiating tactic. It may not have much impact, but it may have an optical impact, in the sense that Trump can then go back to his base and say, I won because I really strangled them at the end with this double blockade and they caved. True or not, that would just be part of his narrative. And to be frank with you, I would be very surprised if the US really goes after some of these ships, because the oil on those tankers are Chinese and Indian oil. They've paid for it. And if Trump is going to go and intercept these ships, a couple of weeks before he's supposed to have a very crucial summit with Xi in Beijing, I find that very surprising. So again,
and
this
Pakistani ships, which are the media.
And Pakistani ships who've been hosting these talks. So I think this is a lot of the type of charade that is just part and parcel of negotiations. I don't take it too seriously. I think the question is, the Iranians now really want a deal. They really want sanctions relief. The US is going to push hard on some of these nuclear variables. From what we've seen so far, the Iranians are willing to give way more, even after this war, on the nuclear issue than they were in the JCPOA. But they're going to ask for some serious sanctions relief in return.
What and they see get? That their damage is about 270 billion, according to the the Iranian government spokesperson. What do you think they will press for, and what do you think they'll be able to get out of the Americans?
I think they're going to be pressing for primary sanctions to be lifted, which means the sanctions that the US is imposing on American companies. Those were never lifted in the JCPOA. The US in the JCPOA only addressed the secondary sanctions, which are the sanctions that prevented Chinese and European and GCC countries from trading with Iran or investing in Iran. By going after the primary sanctions, you're essentially really weakening the secondary sanctions. Because if US imposes sanctions on Iran only for other countries, but it allows its own companies to go in, it's just not going to be a tenable situation. Those primary sanctions, incidentally, are primarily through executive orders, which means that Trump can lift those with a stroke of a pen, whereas the secondary sanctions are primarily through Congress, which requires, like the Caesar Act, a lifting of the sanctions, an affirmative vote in Congress, which is trickier to get, politically more challenging, more costly. I would say that after November, I don't see much of a chance of the US being able to lift the secondary sanctions. But before November, it may not be an impossibility as long as Trump still has that sway within the Republican Party. He's going to meet resistance undoubtedly, but there may also be other interests that will be awakened who recognize that access to the Iranian market, particularly after this war, is going to be a very attractive thing for American companies.
What else could Iranians get out of this? Do you think that they won't get any reparations? Will they be able to continue charging a toll at the Strait of Hormuz? Would they be able to get some of their assets unfrozen? But more importantly, they need to give something to Trump. Trump needs to have a political win, so this doesn't look like, hey, I went into war with Iran and we gave him a deal better than JCPOA.
Yeah. So first of all, on some of these other things, yes, I think they will continue to have a mechanism. And I think the US has itself even made proposals on how it could be part of that mechanism. In Islamabad, apparently the Iranians rejected.
Mechanism on the Strait of Hormuz toll?
Exactly. So the US actually would get a percentage of that toll. The Iranians rejected that. I don't think that is a hard rejection. I think there may be opportunities for the US to be able to get other things, perhaps making sure that a lot of those tolls are paid in dollars instead of crypto and yuan. Alternatively, the Iranians may agree to make sure that a percentage of those tolls are being used to buy American products from the United States, which again would then require the US lifting the sanctions. So it's it's a concession to the US, but it's also
treasuries. You mean like financial instruments? You mean by products?
No. I'm talking about goods and other things from the United States. So it's a way for the Iranians to give a concession to the US, saying we're going to purchase things from you. But on the other hand, that requires that the US lifts the sanctions on those primary sanctions. I think on the nuclear front, the Iranians are probably going to give him a lot that enables him to say that he got a much better deal than Obama. They already agreed to this in Geneva. Trump should have taken that deal. He didn't. He started a war instead. It seems like the Iranians are still operating from the basis of those proposals from Geneva instead of dramatically hardening their position on what they give. What they're getting is apparently where things have become more assertive on the Iranian side, in the sense that what they're asking for in return in terms of sanctions relief is greater. And as you pointed out, the Iranians are not going to get reparations. But reparations can be baked in, at least rhetorically, in the type of sanctions relief they get, etc. And the tolls can also be treated as a reparations, but sadly it will be Asian countries that will pay the reparations, not the ones that actually started the war, even though those Asian countries had nothing to do with this war. And as you have seen, already the South Koreans have traveled to Iran, and the Japanese apparently are on their way there as well. The Spanish just reopened their embassy there. And I would also say something else I think is important to you, Mario, mindful where your family is from, that we've seen the Europeans really issuing some much, much stronger statements and also taking some measures against Israel and its bombardment of Lebanon. I don't find that to be unrelated to the fact that the Iranians have been insisting that the end of the ceasefire, or the end of the war, also has to encompass Lebanon. And we've talked about it before, why the Iranians find this to be important. But I find it just interesting that the Europeans now suddenly have found their courage to push back against Israel, now when they know that there is a substantive pressure on Israel to end that war that is coming from somewhere else that has nothing to do with Europe.